The radical left Democrats rigged the presidential election in 2020, and we're not going to allow them to rig the presidential election in 2024.
Trump jaagt schrik aan, dreigt en wint mogelijk de Amerikaanse presidentsverkiezingen.
We better straighten out our elections. We better get smart, because the people of the country are not going to take it. We're not going to take it. We're not going to take it any longer.
Fear about the future of American democracy is not just speculation. American democracy has already begun to decline.
Daniel Ziblatt is professor politiek aan Harvard. Hij schreef 2 verontrustende boeken: How Democracies Die, Hoe democratieën sterven, en Tyranny of the Minority, de tirannie van de minderheid. Ziblatt waarschuwt.
I don't suspect that if Trump comes to power, that overnight the U.S. will turn into Putin's Russia. There's sources of resistance against it. But that said, it's pretty clear that Trump represents a threat insofar as he's made it clear. I mean, he's the basic hallmarks to be a democratic politician means you accept elections, win or lose, and you don't use violent rhetoric or use violence to try to gain and to hold on to power. These are 2 cardinal rules of democracy, and he's violated both of them.
De bestorming van het Capitool was een schokkende gebeurtenis. Waarom waren Trump-aanhangers zo boos? Waarom voelen ze zich zo veronachtzaamd? De diepere oorzaak van extreemrechts denken is de economische ongelijkheid en daardoor ook de haat tegen de elite en hun gebrek aan kansen.
Parents are fearful that their own kids aren't going to be able to have the same living standards as they do. And this is a problem across Western Europe as well as in the United States, and it's driven by broad economic factors. So I think this makes voters vulnerable to the appeals of demagoguery. A second big factor, though, is our changing demographics. As our society becomes more diverse, then it becomes very easy for demagogues to blame those economic problems on cultural minorities or increasing diversity. And then the third big factor is technological. I think the rise of social media and the kind of decline of traditional media institutions makes it much easier for demagogue to rise to the top of a political system. So you put these 3 factors together and you have a very dangerous cocktail.
Our enemies want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom. That's what this is all about. They want to silence me because I will never let them silence you. And in the end, they're not after me, they're after you. I just happen to be standing in the way.
Trump hoeft door het Amerikaanse kiesstelsel niet de meerderheid te halen om de verkiezingen toch te winnen.
Where the U.S. is very distinctive is that we have the only constitution in the world in which it's possible for a president to lose the popular vote, lose the vote, and gain the presidency.
De Amerikaanse grondwet is niet altijd even pro-democratisch. Het document, 250 jaar oud, is in feite niet meer aangepast aan deze tijd en ook veel te vaag.
That it just leaves so much open for interpretation, and so that is a problem, and that's this is how we've ended up with decisions like the Supreme Court saying, well, the president is actually immune from criminal prosecution. This is actually nowhere in the Constitution, but this is just the court's interpretation of this.
You're right, good constitutions protect minorities. But in this era, the protection of minorities is used to go against the will of majorities.
Yeah, so there's a couple of key areas where political minorities have, in my view, too much power. One, we've talked about the Electoral College. A second, even in some ways more problematic institution, is the U.S. Senate, because every state has 2 senators, no matter its size. So Wyoming, with 500,000 residents, has the same representation as California with 30 million citizens. This has become even more problematic over time as rural areas, which tend to be smaller states, have increasingly voted for Republicans, and urban and big states tended to vote for Democrats. So it's very common, and for most of the 21st century, the majority of U.S. senators haven't represented the majority of Americans.
The yeas are 49, the nays are 51. The motion is not agreed to.
Zo houdt de Senaat wetten tegen, zoals landelijke bescherming van het abortusrecht.
The majority of the American people believe in defending a woman's right, her choice, to decide what happens to her own body. And this vote clearly suggests that the Senate is not where the majority of Americans are on this issue.
Zo werkt het systeem. Een wettelijk systeem dat in feite tegen de wil van het volk ingaat.
This means that the Republican Party doesn't face the same pressures to reach out to a broad, diverse population. And so it doubles down on its strategy. So there's real pressure within the Republican Party to radicalize and push to the right. Normally in a two-party system like the United States, what would happen is the institutions provide a kind of counterweight, a counter incentive for parties to have to move to the center. They say, well, we have this extremist base, but we have to stitch together this broad coalition and appeal to over 50% of the population. Donald Trump has never won a majority of the vote. In any other democracy, I think at this point, the Republican Party would have abandoned Trump.
Tumult en geweld vallen niet uit te sluiten en zijn zelfs waarschijnlijk. Ooit vocht Amerika een burgeroorlog uit, 165 jaar geleden. Dat lijkt anno 2024 min of meer onwaarschijnlijk.
I think one of the major determinants of whether or not a country is subject to civil war is not just animosity. There's lots of animosity in many countries. It's how effective is the state. And I think the U.S. government, the U.S. state, the police, so on, it remains pretty effective. And so I think some of this damage can be contained. Another determinant of whether or not there's a civil war is the wealth of a country. I mean, there's a lot of people with a lot to lose, and so a lot of Americans, get really angry if their Wi-Fi goes out. So I'm not sure if they're really willing to go in the streets and destroy everything that exists in the U.S. But I think violence is a real concern.